So let's look at our trig functions. We're going to look at sine, cosine, tangent, and the reciprocal functions for each one. Now the first thing that we need to look at is our little generic triangle that we have drawn on our worksheet. We have leg A, leg B, and then we have the hypotenuse, which is C. Now what you see right here in the corner is our angle measure, and this is actually called theta. So it's a Greek letter or Greek symbol, and it's called theta. And we use that to represent the measure of an acute angle in a right triangle. Okay, let's talk about what sine, cosine, and tangent are in reference to our right triangle. Now sine is spelled S-I-N-E. The abbreviation for sine is going to be the first three letters, which will be S-I-N. So the sine of theta, if you will recall from last year, is going to be the opposite over the hypotenuse. So looking at this triangle right here, we have the opposite, which is going to be side A, over the hypotenuse, which is going to be the longest side directly across from the right angle, which is going to be side C. So opposite over hypotenuse in our triangle, A over C. Now the cosine is going to be abbreviated using the first three letters, C-O-S. So the cosine of theta is going to be the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. Now if you look at our little triangle here, you see that side B and side C are both adjacent to the angle theta. But side C has a higher calling in that it has to be the hypotenuse, and that's it. So the side or the leg that is adjacent to theta is going to be side B. And then, of course, the hypotenuse is C. So adjacent over hypotenuse is B over C in our little triangle. Now, looking at the next one, we have the tangent. The tangent of theta is going to be the opposite over the adjacent. So, once again, with theta, opposite is going to be A, adjacent is going to be B. So we have A over B. Now, I forgot to mention the tangent is abbreviated using the first three letters, T-A-N. So for each of our trig functions, we use the first three letters for their abbreviation. Now, the reciprocal functions is when we take sine, cosine, and tangent and we flip them. So looking at the first reciprocal function, that's going to be the cosecant. Now, we can't use COS as the abbreviation like we did in the first three, because COS is actually the abbreviation for cosine. So instead, we use CSC for cosecant. Now, it says right here that cosecant is the reciprocal function of sine. So if sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse, that tells me cosecant is the hypotenuse over the opposite side. So if sine is A over C, cosecant is C over A. Now, looking at the next one, we have the secant. We can go back to using our first three letters again. So SEC is the abbreviation for secant. So it tells us that secant is the reciprocal function for cosine. So if cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, secant is hypotenuse over adjacent. So on our triangle, if cosine is B over C, secant is C over B. And finally, we have the cotangent. Its abbreviation is the first three letters, C-O-T. It's the reciprocal function for tangent. So if tangent is opposite over adjacent, cotangent is adjacent over opposite. So on our triangle, if it's A over B, cotangent is B over A. All right, and those are the 6 trig functions that you need to memorize. Now, the original 3, sine, cosine, and tangent, you can use SOHCAHTOA. And that helps you remember that sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. And then you have to remember that the reciprocal of sine is cosecant, cosine is secant, and tangent is cotangent. Just remember with the reciprocal functions, you'll never have the same letter. So S and C, C and S, T and C. They're never the same. Okay, so let's look at an example here on number 9. We have a right triangle, and these are our two legs, if you'll notice, because this is our hypotenuse, which is side C. So that needs to be the first thing that I need to figure out. So using the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, I have my legs here, A and B. Okay, so here's the math. I squared both sides and added them together, and now I have c squared equals 1,156. So to find c, I'm going to take the square root. So going to my trusty calculator, I have the square root of 1,156, which is 34. So that tells me that side C is equal to 34 units. All right, so let's find our trig functions. So sine, if you remember, is the opposite over the hypotenuse of theta. Theta is in this bottom corner right here, okay? So the opposite of theta is going to be 16. The hypotenuse is the value we just found, which is 34. Anytime you do a fractions, you are going to simplify it, even if it's a trig function. So 2 into 16 and 2 into 34 will give us 8/17. Now the cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. Adjacent to theta is going to be 30. The hypotenuse is 34. Once again, simplify by dividing by 2, and you get 15/17. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, so the opposite of theta is 16. Adjacent is 30. Reduce, and you get 8/15. Now to find the reciprocal functions, find the reciprocals. So if sine is 8/17, cosecant is 17/8. If cosine is 15/17, secant is 17/15. If tangent is 8/15, cotangent is 15/8. All right, now looking at number 10, it says, given the ratio for cosine, find the remaining ratios. Well, we're told here that cosine is 2/3. That's the adjacent over the hypotenuse.